look at the visit you've just seen. One thing that makes our society unique is our willingness and ability to respond promptly. This is a Saturday. Most other agencies are closed. We must be prepared to respond at inconvenient times and often with sketchy information. Sometimes the first problem you run into is a voice through the door asking, "Who's there?" That can get you into an awkward shouting match, giving your names or yelling, "St. Vincent de Paul Society." This is probably meaningless to Mrs. Thorpe. Jack's approach is a good one. We're from the church. It's short, it tells the neighbors nothing, but it says everything to Mrs. Thorpe. Jack introduced Mary and himself by giving their first and last names. Though disclosing your full name is normal when making introductions, our experience is that the first name is enough. There have been plenty of occasions over the life of the society in which disclosure of a full name has led to client calls in the middle of the night, or ongoing clients have been known to track down members and show up on their doorstep asking for help. So once again, we recommend first names only. Now here is an example of the kind of distractions that we often run into.
My husband works as a landscaper, but work's been slow, and he didn't get his 40 hours in.
Sure.
To join your games.
Hey, I was watching that.
If it can't be done the way Jack did it, try standing in front of the picture for a few seconds and then turn it off. Or ask permission, as long as nobody gets a chance to say no. In that scene, just as Mary sat down, her first words were, "We understand you are having a problem with your electric bill." Unless there are compelling reasons to the contrary, get right to the point. Mrs. Thorpe knows this is not a social call, and beating around the bush is likely to cause unneeded anxiety and tension, at least on the first call. Okay, the Vincentians knew or thought they knew that the Thorpes were $125 behind on their bill. Nevertheless, Jack decided to confirm this with a gentle question. How much do they want? And Mary met the surprising answer head on.
How much do they want?
$265.
Wow, that is tough. We thought it was only 125.
That's what I told the church because I thought Jason would be getting work this week, and I was going to borrow some money from my mom. I don't know what to do.
This was all done in a direct, honest, and friendly way, yet it produced the following information. $265, not $125. Then there's her mom. And Mrs. Thorpe thought her husband was going to work that day. It began to look like more than a problem with the electric bill. The Vincentians tried a little more probing.
How are you fixed for food?
Well, we have enough. I just wish we could get that electric bill paid. It's just one thing after another.
Are there any other major problems, Mrs. Thorpe?
No, it's just the electric bill.
Are you okay on your rent?
Yes, that's okay. We have a nice landlord.
These appear to have been 3 rapid-fire questions, but in the actual conversation, as you saw, the questions were easy and friendly and non-threatening. As it happened, the last one opened up another door, rent problems. Jack or Mary could have asked at this point, "Are you behind on the rent too?" But that would have sounded like scolding. And besides, Mrs. Thorpe hadn't really volunteered any information about rent. They could have ignored it, which would also have been a mistake. If there is in fact a rent problem, they should try to find out about it. Mary accomplished this by repeating one of Mrs. Thorpe's statements, thus turning it into an innocuous question. This is a technique called reflection. A person makes a statement and you want to hear more about it, but don't want to ask directly. Simply repeat a key word or phrase in the statement as Mary did. It's an easy technique to use and can be very effective in encouraging a client to elaborate.
Are you okay on your rent?
Yes, that's okay. We have a nice landlord.
A nice landlord?
Yes, he lets us play catch-up when we can.
Mrs. Thorpe did elaborate, and the rent problem surfaced. Another indirect approach was used by Jack in attempting to get to the root of the problem, Jason's job. Jack wondered out loud about Jason's job and getting a job with Joe Mansfield's landscaping company. This led to the problem about Jason's back and so forth. However, As you saw, the Vincentians were not successful in getting to the root of the problem. This is not unusual, especially on a first visit as it was in this case. However, there was an opportunity that the Vincentians missed. You can learn more by listening than by talking. Very often, silence and an inquiring look can bring a lot more. It happened here.
Well, actually, there is work for Jason as long as his back holds out. When it goes out, he can't work.
His back?
Yes, he hurt his back. He fell off a 6-foot wall.
6-foot wall?
Well, he was on the job and he slipped in the mud or something. Anyway, it's not serious. And as long as his back holds up, he can go back to work again. But right now, he can't.
Jack asked a question about workman's compensation. Had he and Mary remained silent for 5 seconds, or even 10 seconds, Mrs. Thorpe might have resumed discussing Jason's problem. We'll never know. Another mistake, or probably a mistake, was made by Jack earlier when he seemed to promise something that he might not be able to deliver.
We can call our friends the electric company, and we can pay off something to get the disconnect postponed, I'm sure.
Jack said, "I'm sure," when he really wasn't. He may have judged that Mrs. Thorpe needed reassurance at that point more than she needed reality. Or it may have been an unthinking, loving, human response on his part. In any case, this kind of thing demands a lot of care. When you make a promise, people listen. Another point that we would like to make is that the Vincentians were observant. You can learn a lot by noticing some of the small things. The wedding picture on the table may indicate that the marriage is in reasonable shape. The cellular telephone may tell you something about the family spending habits. Here, Mary looked at the children's toys and asked them their names, which she eventually used as a sort of tension breaker. Later, she asked, "How are you fixed for food?" And although Mrs. Thorpe responded, "We have enough," we went on to the supermarket. Throughout the entire visit, Mary and Jack were trying to do what I mentioned at the beginning: serve the needy effectively and compassionately, without in any way causing them a loss of dignity. Many of our members often ask about praying with the people we visit. On this visit, Mary and Jack brought prayer in just before they departed. Mary invited Mrs. Thorpe to join in prayer, and after she agreed, Jack invited the kids. You will find that most people will join in the prayer or allow you to say a prayer for them. If they decline or indicate in some way that it would be offensive to them, then simply back off. Don't force your faith on them. Jack prayed a spontaneous prayer. If you're not comfortable with spontaneous prayer, we have found that most people know the Our Father. Prayer is also a great witness that we are here as God's representatives. God cares about them so much, he sent us to do what we could to help. I have with me today the two Arizona Vincentians who just appeared in this film, Jack Ahern and Mary Helen Kelly. They're very experienced Vincentians, and we thought it would be beneficial to bring them into the studio here to discuss what occurred on the visit and their impressions of what went on during that home visit. Mary Helen, I noticed that you and Jack began to discuss the case after you left the house, but right in front of the house. Do you normally do that?
No, never.
Why did you do it in this case?
Well, we were on location for this film, and it would have been right to discuss the case as we always do after a visit, but not in view of the family or their neighbors. We probably would have gotten in the car and driven off and talked as we did in the beginning, discussing the facts we knew about the case. We would have done this at the end, but not in view of the family.
Jack, what would you normally discuss about a case immediately after the visit?
First impressions, the process of beginning strategy, really. What ways we can help. One always picks up on something, some little nuance the other one hasn't picked up on. And I think that's because we're male and female. Mary Helen quite often picks up on things from the feminine perspective, and I from the masculine. I believe that we really complement each other that way.
Mary, do you run into situations like this very often?
Yes, and while this wasn't typical, we see a lot of cases like this. This was a case of people who got so far behind, they may have had other problems deeper than we could immediately perceive. It was not a solvable problem. What I mean, there was a lot to do. Salvation Army could help with the electric bill. and county services for the rent assistance, plus our help with both. It's also a long-term kind of thing. Almost as soon as we finished the interview, we sort of got the idea that we were really going to have to look in on this family on a regular basis.
In our own conference, we find that people quite often don't come to us until it's late, sometimes really too late. So we have found that by going to school teachers and nurses, we can find out what people are in trouble, and we can actually go and visit them.
Yeah, that's part of an outreach attitude that should be part of every St. Vincent de Paul conference.
I also noticed there were two of you. Do you always go in teams?
Yes, that's the rule. And in our conference, we shoot for a male and female team, since we have a mix of men and women.
What is your experience with the men of the families that you visit? Do they stick around? Are they willing to talk to you?
This is a good reenactment. I think it had a couple of good elements in it that were very true and very real. Men do show up. They generally try to disappear, and they seem to be embarrassed. We find more often than not that we can keep them there by trying to make them feel comfortable and at ease, instead of, oh, here he is. Any guy would want to leave.
The interview goes much better because we get to see the interplay between the husband and the wife, or the male and female, because sometimes they aren't married. If it's a mother and a son, we start talking. We've gone to see the mother. She's a senior citizen and has a problem. The son comes in. And 5 minutes is pure gold in seeing what really is the problem. We know what we can begin to turn our attention to.
Do you sometimes go out on a call expecting to find one problem, and when you get there find it's much more difficult, or that it sometimes takes 2 or 3 visits to find what the real problem is?
Yes, sometimes that is the case. For an example, this morning before I came here, I got a phone call. It's from a woman who asked for help for rent. She wanted to know if we could help her. She's a client. She's been with us, I think, about 2 years. She's from El Salvador.
You've known this client for 2 years? How long do you typically stay with a case?
I guess as long as they need us. You can't put a time limit on it. If someone, after the case is talked about, says we've been with these people for a long time, then something is wrong with our attitude, because the poor are always with us. We really can't say, oh, we're finished with these guys, isn't that great? Sometimes it happens, but when they look like they're going to fly, like they're going to make it on their own, something happens. Then they are free enough, thank God, to call us and say, it's not working out. We have problems. That attitude or trust between the people that we visit and the conference or the members of the society, it's so important that they have that attitude of trust.
I noticed just before you left, you said a prayer with the family.
Yes, that's correct.
Do you do that all the time?
We try for that. Once in a while, someone will turn us down, but generally, most people are willing to pray with us, or at least listen to us pray.
Have you ever encountered someone who got upset about praying?
No, most people go along with it. Most people really do believe in God.
Have you always been comfortable praying with people?
No, it took me a while to get used to it, but it now seems natural and the right thing to do. I won't leave a call without praying.
Thank you very much, Jack and Mary, for sharing your experiences with us today. Even though that was a simulated visit, we all agree it certainly had all the things in it that we run across as members of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Vincentians may vary in skills, talent, education, social position, and wealth, but one thing they all share is love for the poor. Vincent de Paul, patron saint of the society, said it this way: "You will find that charity is a heavy burden to carry, heavier than the bowl of soup in the food basket, but you will keep your gentleness and your smile. It is not enough to give bread and soup. This the rich can do. You are the servant of the poor. They are your masters. And the more difficult they can be, the more unjust and insulting, the more love you must give them. It is for your love alone that the poor will forgive you the bread you give them." This is the Vincentian vocation, and I'm Paul Kelly.